He was mistaken for a janitor, arrested without reason, mocked by two arrogant officers. But the moment they locked him in a cell, they triggered something much bigger. An FBI raid they never saw coming. "Sir, you can't just walk back there." That was the first thing Terrence Mallory heard when he stepped into the 4th Street police station in downtown Raleigh. His boots were still damp from the morning rain. His navy blue work uniform had specks of dust and rust from the courthouse basement pipes he had inspected earlier. He wasn't there to cause trouble. In fact, he thought he was doing the right thing. Terrence had worked maintenance at the Joseph P. Stanley Federal Courthouse for nearly 18 years. Quiet, dependable, and skilled with his hands. He was the kind of man who fixed broken things without asking for thanks. Most people just called him T, and he was fine with that. He didn't show off. He didn't raise his voice. He never looked for conflict. But that morning, something felt wrong. He had seen two men near a restricted parking area behind the courthouse. They were hanging around a black Chevy Impala with out-of-state license plates. One of them slid something under the trunk before disappearing into a side alley. It wasn't dramatic, but it didn't feel right, especially since that same parking lot had been mentioned in a security meeting weeks earlier. Terrence didn't waste time. He grabbed his ID badge, tossed his tool bag into the van, and drove straight to the nearest police station. But now he stood in the middle of a tiled lobby, being stared at by a pale officer with a buzz cut and a bad attitude. "I work at the federal courthouse," Terrence said, keeping his voice steady. "I saw something suspicious near the loading dock and thought I should tell someone." The officer narrowed his eyes. "You're a janitor?" "I'm in maintenance. Been there almost 20 years. Another voice joined in. Detective Ray Coulson, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped forward. He chewed gum like it owed him money. "What's in the bag?" he asked. "My tool," Terrence replied. Without asking, Coulson grabbed the bag from Terrence's hand. "You can't just walk into a police station saying you saw something and expect us to jump. I'm just reporting what I saw. There were two men. One of them left something under a car. I thought it might be drugs or a weapon." Another officer, Blake Mercer, younger and wearing sunglasses indoors, walked over and looked Terrence up and down. "You sure you weren't the one leaving something?" Terrence blinked. "Excuse me?" "You match a description," Mercer said. "Dark clothes, utility bag, seen walking near a government building." Terrence sighed and pulled out his ID. "Look, I work in the Joseph P. Stanley Courthouse. My supervisor's name is Rodney Keene. Call him." But they didn't call anyone. Coulson grabbed the ID, barely looked at it, then dropped it on the desk. "You're loitering and not cooperating," he said flatly. "Let's go." "What?" Terrence took a step back. "You can't be serious. I came to report something. That's all." Coulson didn't reply. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Terrence raised his hands slightly, calmly, not aggressively, just trying to slow things down. "You're arresting me? For what?" "Obstruction, trespassing, maybe lying to an officer. We'll sort it out," Coulson mumbled. And just like that, his wrists were cuffed. The station lobby was nearly empty. Only a bored desk clerk and a woman waiting to pay a ticket were there. No one said a word. No one stepped in. Terrence was led down a hallway like a criminal, his ID left face down on the desk. As they walked, he glanced at a bulletin board. A blurry photocopy from a surveillance camera caught his eye. He recognized the background. It was the same parking lot, the same black Impala. But now he wasn't a witness. He was in a cell. The holding cell smelled like bleach and dust. The kind of clean that didn't feel clean. Terrence sat on a bench, elbows on his knees, trying to process how things had changed so fast. One moment, he thought he was doing the right thing. The next, his belt and shoelaces were in a bin. His dignity felt taken away. He stared at the cinder block wall, then down at his hands. Rough, dry, with a few cuts from working on pipes the day before. These were working hands. Honest hands. He rubbed them together slowly. The only sound in a room designed to make people feel invisible. A voice broke the silence. "Hey, what did they get you for?" Terrence looked up. Another man, maybe in his late 20s, sat on the bench across from him. He was thin, jittery, with eyes that moved constantly. He wore a worn-out hoodie and a beat-up pair of Air Jordans. "Loitering, apparently," Terrence replied. "And obstruction." The man let out a short laugh. They always make something up when they don't have a real reason. He leaned back. Name's Darnell. Terrence. Darnell looked him over. You don't look like you belong here. I don't. Darnell nodded slowly, like he understood more than he was saying. They get nervous when they see someone who knows how to carry himself, especially someone who looks like you. Before Terrence could reply, the door clicked. Officer Mercer walked in, holding a clipboard. Mallory, you got someone to call? I already told your partner. Call my supervisor, Rodney Keene, Joseph P. Stanley Courthouse, Maintenance Department. Mercer gave a lazy shrug. That's not how it works. You give me a number or you sit here until someone cares enough to come looking. Terrence stared at him but didn't say anything. Mercer tapped the bars. Suit yourself, he muttered as he walked off. A few minutes went by, then 10. The buzzing lights above began to wear on Terrence's nerves. Then he heard a quieter voice from the hallway. You said he works at the courthouse? It was someone new, older, calm. Not Coulson's bark or Mercer's smugness. Yeah, but it doesn't matter, Mercer replied. He came in rambling about some car. Had a whole story ready. Guy's probably trying to set us up. There was a pause. You check the ID? The older voice asked. Mercer didn't answer. Terrence stood up and walked closer to the bars. He couldn't see them, but their voices carried down the hallway. You didn't check the ID, did you? The older voice asked again. I mean, Coulson looked at it. That's not what I asked. A long silence followed, then footsteps faded away. Terrence sat back down. He didn't trust easily. But something about that voice felt different. He held on to that. Back at the front desk, the older man, Sergeant Charles Petrie, was flipping through a stack of reports. Then he found Terrence's file. Something didn't make sense. He picked up the ID Coulson had tossed aside earlier and looked it over. His eyes narrowed. Federal employee, level 3 clearance, long service history. Sergeant Petrie stood up and walked over to Coulson's desk. Where is he? Holding. Yeah. Why? This man's been working with the federal court since 2005, Petrie said, tapping the ID on the desk. You didn't call to verify anything. You just cuffed him because of what? His outfit? Coulson shrugged. Guy looks suspicious. Tool bag, courthouse. Wrong place, wrong time. That's not suspicious, Petrie said. That's called doing his job. Coulson didn't respond. Petrie sighed and walked away. But the damage had already started. Cracks forming beneath the surface. Outside the station, someone else had already noticed Terrence was missing. Rodney Keene wasn't the kind of man who panicked easily. As head of maintenance at the Joseph P. Stanley Courthouse, he managed a team of 12. He had handled everything from asbestos problems to flooded archives. But when Terrence Mallory didn't return from his break after nearly an hour, something felt wrong. Terrence wasn't the kind of guy to vanish without a call. No long breaks, no leaving early. He was reliable, predictable even. Rodney waited 10 more minutes, checked the crew log again, then finally picked up his office phone. He called Terrence's number, straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. Rodney stared out the window of his second-floor office. His eyes locked on the rear parking lot. That morning, Terrence had mentioned something about the black Chevy Impala parked near the fence. Said it didn't feel right. Rodney had brushed it off at the time, told him to just file a report if it seemed suspicious, but now the pieces were clicking together. A puzzle he didn't want to finish. He dialed again. This time he called the police station. 4th Street Police. Officer Danvers speaking. Yeah, hi. I'm looking for someone who might have come by there. Terrence Mallory. Works maintenance for the federal courthouse down the road. Dark uniform, probably carrying a tool bag. There was a pause, typing sounds in the background. Yeah, we've got a Mallory in holding, Danvers said flatly. Came in earlier. Charges pending. Rodney leaned back in his chair. What? What the hell for? Danvers cleared his throat. Obstruction, trespassing, loitering. Rodney scoffed. He works for the government. Did anyone even bother to check his ID? Sir, I'm just reading what's on the form, Danvers replied. Rodney hung up and immediately made another call, this time to a contact he only used in real emergencies. His voice was sharp, urgent. We've got a problem, back at the precinct. Meanwhile, Terrence sat in the cell, his head leaned against the cold wall. Darnell had been released a few minutes earlier. Now it was just him. No updates, no voices, just the constant hum of fluorescent lights and the faint sound of phones ringing at the front desk. Then something changed. Outside, tires screeched slightly on the pavement. Not loud, just enough to be noticed. Like someone stopped with purpose. Two matte black SUVs pulled up in front of the station. No sirens, no flashing lights, but anyone paying attention would have seen it. Four men in dark suits stepping out in sync, eyes sharp, movements precise. Something was about to shift. The front desk clerk looked up as the agents entered. The first one showed a badge. No smile. We need to speak with your commanding officer. Now. Back in the holding cell, Terrence heard the noise. Voices were getting louder, footsteps faster. He stood up, unsure of what was going on. His heart started racing. Not from fear, but because something felt different. Down the hallway, Coulson was sitting at his desk, flipping through a report. Sergeant Petrie walked up quickly. We've got company, he said quietly. Coulson looked up. Who? Feds. Coulson stopped chewing his gum. Three agents entered the hallway. Seconds later, the lead agent, a woman in her early 40s, with tight hair and sharp eyes, handed Petrie a sealed envelope. Federal warrants. Internal review. Open it, Coulson said, standing up. Wait, what is this about? The agent turned toward him without blinking. You're Detective Ray Coulson, right? He nodded slowly. You're coming with us. Now. Another agent walked past them toward the cells. Terrence heard the keys jingle. The cell door swung open. Mr. Mallory, the agent said. Terrence stepped forward carefully. Yeah? We're here on behalf of the Justice Department. You're free to go. Terrence blinked. Just like that? The agent nodded slightly. Your arrest wasn't done properly. Terrence walked into the hallway. The lights were brighter out here. Everyone in the main office area had stopped what they were doing. Phone calls dropped mid-conversation. The room went quiet, but the real storm was just beginning. The truth was about to crash down like a freight train. You could hear a pin drop in the hallway. Terrence followed the agent through the corridor. He was still handcuffed, but the mood had completely changed. Where earlier there was doubt and disrespect, now there was confusion and fear. Coulson stood frozen near his desk. Mercer, still wearing those ridiculous mirrored sunglasses, had finally taken them off. They were resting in his hand, which now hung uncertainly at his side. For the first time since Terrence arrived, neither of them had anything clever to say. The agent walking with Terrence didn't slow down. We're taking you out of the building. Just stay close. At the front desk, Sergeant Petrie opened the sealed packet. His eyebrows pulled together as he read through the pages. Names, dates, surveillance images, internal memos, complaint after complaint. The same names kept coming up. Coulson, Mercer. There had been rumors. Officers being too aggressive. Evidence disappearing. Arrests made without proper documentation. Petrie had always suspected something was off, but he'd never had proof. Now the proof had been delivered. Organized and undeniable. Terrence reached the lobby. Two agents stood by the door. One held a clipboard. The other had a small voice recorder. The taller agent turned toward him. Mr. Mallory, we're walking you to our vehicle. You're not under arrest. You're not being detained. You're a witness. And your actions helped us move forward with something much bigger than you know. I just came to report what I saw, Terrence said quietly. And you did. That small act broke open a wall we've been trying to push through for months. Outside in the parking lot, the air was damp and heavy. The same Chevy Impala Terrence had reported earlier was now behind yellow police tape. Two more agents were circling it carefully. One was taking photos near the back bumper. Another was opening the trunk while wearing gloves. Rodney Keene stood to the side, pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. The moment he saw Terrence, he let out a breath of relief and rushed over. T, he said, voice low and urgent. You all right? Terrence nodded slowly. Yeah, I think so. Rodney glanced at the agents. They told me what happened. I called internal affairs after talking to that desk sergeant. Then I called Lisa Conway at the district office. I didn't know it would blow up like this. I didn't either. You know they had no right to lay a hand on you, right? Terrence let out a dry laugh. They didn't even look at my ID. Behind them, the station doors opened again. Two officers led Coulson outside, his arms cuffed behind his back, his face blank. Mercer followed a few minutes later, this time without the sunglasses. He was walking between two agents. No handcuffs yet, but his hands were shaking. A news van had already arrived across the street. Someone had leaked the story. A small crowd was gathering on the sidewalk, whispering and recording videos on their phones. Rodney looked at Terrence again. You sure you're okay? I've been better, Terrence said, but I'm glad I spoke up. I almost didn't. Rodney gently patted his shoulder. They're going to write about this, probably make it messy. You know how people react when police are under pressure? Terrence nodded. Let them write. I just want the truth to come out. An agent stepped closer. Mr. Mallory, we'll need a full statement. You can give it at the courthouse, or we can take you to the regional field office. It's your choice. Terrence looked toward the courthouse tower, peeking through the skyline. I'd rather go home, but I'll give you what you need. Understood. But the real damage wasn't just about one bad arrest. It was about what that arrest uncovered. Behind closed doors, the next morning's headlines had already started spreading. Federal agents raid police precinct after wrongful arrest. Maintenance worker mistaken for suspect triggers FBI corruption probe. Two officers suspended after surprise federal sweep. But behind those headlines was something deeper, something more human. Terrence sat at his kitchen table, still wearing the same clothes from the day before, except for the belt and shoelaces that had been taken at the police station. He hadn't slept much, maybe just a few hours. Not from fear, though that still lingered, but from the kind of restless thinking that keeps your mind running all night. Across from him sat Agent Corinne Vega, sipping coffee from a plain white mug. She'd come by early. She said it would be more comfortable to talk here instead of dragging him into an office. That small act meant something to him. Terrence, I know yesterday was a lot, she said, but I need you to walk me through everything, from when you saw the car to when they put handcuffs on you. He leaned back and crossed his arms. I already told one of your guys. I know, Vega replied, but I need the full version, with the small details only you remember. Terrence sighed through his nose. Fine. I saw the black Impala just after 9. Same car that was flagged at that security briefing 3 weeks ago. Two white guys in dark hoodies. One opened the trunk and seemed to place something underneath. I couldn't see what. Vega nodded and wrote notes. By the time I came back around, they were gone. The car was still there. I thought about ignoring it. Maybe it was a contractor or someone like that. But something felt off. You made the right choice, Vega said softly. Didn't feel like it when I ended up in a cell. They never ran your ID? Nope. Never called the courthouse? Nope. Coulson has a history of skipping procedures, especially when it comes to black civilians. Her voice didn't rise, but her grip on the pen tightened. Terrence gave a slight smile. Yeah, I figured. He looked at me like I was guilty before I even said anything. That's why yesterday mattered, she said. We've had complaints, at least 9 in the past 2 years. All were buried internally, but your arrest gave us the opening we needed. It happened in a controlled space. Security cameras recorded everything, and it was completely unjustified. Terrence rubbed his face. I wasn't trying to get anyone fired. You didn't, she replied. Their actions got them fired. You just brought light into a dark room. There was a knock at the door. Rodney walked in, holding a newspaper under one arm and a brown paper bag in the other. I brought egg sandwiches, he said. Then he dropped the paper on the table, headline facing up. Routine tip-off sparks federal crackdown on police corruption. Rodney pointed at the photo below the headline. Coulson being led out of the precinct, his face stiff like stone. Someone posted the full arrest video online. It's everywhere, he said. Terrence shook his head. I didn't ask for this. Yeah, but it found you, Rodney replied. That's the world we live in now. Vega looked at both men. This case is going to take months, but I'll tell you now, Internal Affairs is going to push for permanent removal. That precinct is being checked from top to bottom. Coulson and Mercer are being looked into for more than just your arrest. What else? Terrence asked. Changing evidence, illegal searches, targeting black drivers in certain areas. There's even a stash of confiscated property that's gone missing. Items that were never added to official records. Rodney muttered, "Jesus." Terrence leaned back in his chair. "All that, and I got arrested for reporting a car. No good deed goes unpunished." Rodney nodded, then said quietly, "But sometimes it starts something bigger." But what came next wasn't just about justice. It was about whether anyone would admit what went wrong, out loud. By Friday afternoon, Terrence was back at work. It felt strange walking through the same courthouse halls, badge on his chest, nodding at security like nothing had happened. But people noticed. Eyes followed him. Conversations stopped when he passed, not out of hate, but out of respect. The story had spread fast. Local news, national blogs, even some justice reform groups had picked it up. And though Terrence never wanted to be in the spotlight, he had become the face of a question people had been asking for years. What happens when the people we trust the most get it wrong? In the break room, someone had left another newspaper on the table. This one had a smaller headline, but it carried just as much weight. 2 officers resign amid allegations. Justice Department expands internal probe. Rodney walked in holding a coffee mug with that same thoughtful look he always had when something didn't sit right. "Meeting in the main conference room," he said. "U.S. attorneys are coming. They want to talk to the staff about what's next." Terrence looked up from his coffee. "Do I have to go?" Rodney paused. "They didn't ask for you by name, but I think it matters that you're there." 20 minutes later, Terrence sat near the back wall of the conference room as a woman in a gray suit spoke to the staff. She spoke calmly and clearly. She said the Department of Justice would launch a bigger oversight plan. The precinct on 4th Street would now operate under federal watch. More actions were coming. No one clapped. No one cheered. This wasn't a celebration. It was a wake-up call. After the meeting, a younger employee from Archives, Alyssa, walked up to Terrence near the elevator. "Hey, I just wanted to say, what happened to you was really wrong. I don't know how you stayed so calm." He gave a small shrug. "Didn't feel like I had a choice." "You could have yelled. Fought back," she said. Terrence shook his head. "That's not who I am, and it wouldn't have helped." She nodded slowly, then paused. "I'm glad you spoke up," she said. "Some of us needed to see that change is still possible." Terrence gave a small, tired smile. "Just don't let them forget it happened," he replied. He took the stairs after that. Later that week, the city council announced a public hearing. It wasn't just about Coulson and Mercer anymore. Other citizens had started coming forward. A teacher pulled over without reason. A teenager searched for simply walking home late. A single mother threatened with arrest when she asked for a badge number. Patterns, once only whispered about, were now being spoken out loud. And there was Terrence, sitting quietly in the 3rd row of the council chamber. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone added weight to every story shared at the podium. By the end of the session, the mayor announced a new civilian review board. Independent, transparent, accountable. As people left, a local pastor patted Terrence on the back and said, "Sometimes God doesn't need a loud man. He just needs a steady one." Terrence didn't say much. He just nodded politely and kept walking. Back at home, he stood in front of his bathroom mirror, looking at his reflection longer than usual. The man staring back wasn't different. Same eyes, same tired lines, same calm face. But something had changed. Not in who he was, but in how the world saw him now. And even when the storm passes, the quiet that follows still requires strength. A month later, Terrence stood in front of a small crowd at the East Raleigh Community Center. He wasn't a guest of honor or some public figure. It was just a neighborhood meeting, folding chairs, a few trays of cookies, lukewarm coffee, regular people wanting to talk. He hadn't planned on speaking. He never liked microphones or stages. But when someone brought up what had happened to him, all eyes turned his way. The room went silent. Terrence shifted in his seat. Rodney, sitting next to him, leaned over and said, "You might as well say something." Terrence stood up slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. No notes, no speech. Just the weight of experience still resting on his shoulders. "I didn't ask to be part of this," he began, voice low but steady. "I didn't wake up that morning thinking my name would be in a headline. I just saw something wrong and felt like I had to speak up." He looked around the room. Older folks, parents with kids on their laps, teens sitting in the back. What happened after that? It wasn't about me. It was about how easy it is for people to forget they're dealing with human beings. Not a uniform, not a stereotype. A person. He paused, letting those words sink in. I was called a liar, cuffed like a criminal, all for doing what I believed was right. And I'll be honest, I thought twice about ever speaking up again. A woman in the front row nodded slowly. But the truth is, Terrence continued, staying quiet lets broken things stay broken. Sometimes you have to be the tool that jams the system, even if it costs you peace. Someone clapped softly, then another, then a few more. I didn't want praise. I wanted fairness, not just for me, but for everyone who's been through worse and never had their names in the paper. When the meeting ended, people came up one by one. They shook his hand, thanked him, shared their own stories. Some were decades old, still fresh in their voices. It wasn't closure, but it was connection, and that mattered more. Back home that night, Terrence finally let himself sit still. No agents, no interviews, no side eyes from strangers. Just quiet. He checked his emails, most unread. One stood out. It was from a local high school. The principal invited him to speak in their justice and civics class. Nothing formal. Just tell your story, the email said. He sighed, then smiled faintly. Maybe it was worth it, because if his story could help one student find their voice, or stop one officer from making the same mistake, then that long walk through the precinct hallway had meaning, and maybe that's the point. Not all change begins with big marches or loud speeches. Sometimes it begins when one person says, "This doesn't feel right," and refuses to stay silent. Terrence never wanted attention. He just wanted to go home. Now he had the chance to help others get home too. If this story moved you, if it made you think, reflect, or remember something you've lived or seen, don't just scroll past. Speak up when it matters. Silence doesn't fix anything.
I hope you enjoyed this thrilling journey. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? Let me know in the comments below. Your feedback inspires more epic tales.